Good, good, good. Long
Firstly,
day.
thank yeah, yeah. Firstly, thank you for accepting my invitation and accepting to be on my show.
Of course, I'm sorry we had to reschedule so many times.
Yeah, but it's fine. Thank you. We are connected. I'm happy.
Yeah,
So, I thought to introduce and tell about you to my audience.
absolutely. Yeah, go for it. Do
Yeah,
you want me to introduce myself?
yeah.
Sure, okay. So my name is Adya. I am the face behind the Desi Career Woman on Instagram. That's my first platform. I hope not my only soon. I've been a lifestyle influencer for about 2 years now, and I recently shifted more onto the career side more than anything else. So my Instagram is more about me as a career woman. I like to give career tips, and I am a career coach, but I do want to focus on the person behind as well, not just about the career. So that's a little bit about me.
So I came to know that you are a system analyst too.
I'm a quality systems analyst, so it's not like a fully IT role. It's half of a quality engineer, and then the other half is a systems analyst role. Yeah.
So
Are you a
you
systems analyst as well?
no, I'm a solution architect trainee at the same time. I got a job recently in Canada as a IT director.
Oh my God, congratulations. Welcome to
Yeah,
this group.
thank you. So I have done masters in software engineering and graduation in computer science and engineering. So I have seen you being in technology and you are a career coach as well.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So can you tell more about it? What do you do?
Coaching?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mainly focus on women in STEM. And I focus on one, empowerment as well as any kind of roadblocks. A lot of times, women in STEM, we may not have the best mentors to kind of help drive us through. I was very blessed. My mom was actually an engineer too. So I had her as my mentor for a large portion of like the motivational side, but I still needed a lot of help in terms of like resumes or red flags when it comes to companies, interviews, how to answer questions correctly, stuff like that. I also have a very strong soft corner for international students in America, mainly because I was one too. So I came here on an F1 visa, went through school on that, and it's been really difficult to get jobs as an international student here. So that's something, those are the two kind of like main things that I like to focus on. If somebody is an international woman in STEM, I'm like all for it. I'm not restricted to engineering specifically. Most of my stuff is mainly either career stuff and or, I'm sorry, resume stuff and or mock interviews and interview training and stuff like that, which I hope that is like very actionable. A lot of the coaches that I've seen out there are, they focus a lot more on the meditation and the understanding yourself and a lot of the soft skills. And I want to focus on the actual actionable things that will lead you to having a job after graduation, especially for the international students. You have about 90 days after graduation to get a job. So that's something that I try to keep it pretty focused and pretty tight on my schedule.
You have a connection with two countries. Tell me about that. How you understand the cultures and how you know, like you said, you help international women, you know, who moves one place to another place. So how? Uh, Tell me your experience first.
Sure. I actually grew up moving around a lot. So my parents are from India, but I've never lived in India. I grew up in Singapore for about 12 years, and then we moved to the US, then Australia, then the UK, and then back to the US. So there was a lot. I grew up like all over the world. If people ask me where I'm from, it's super complicated. I don't know what to say. So that's something that I think I really do. I had to, what most people deal with at 18 or 19, I had to deal with when I was 12 when I first moved to America. So there are a lot of things that I had a little bit of an insight, at a loan rate on your first car, stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that I think you kind of learn a little bit more having emigrated here at an earlier age. But then I also left, which is why I came back as an international student. So I still don't have the advantage of being a green card or a citizen here. So yeah, those are some of the things. I don't particularly help people with like the lifestyle skills, but I prefer helping people with the navigating the international job scene, and like people are always very scared of the word sponsorship. They're always like, "Oh, we don't sponsor. Oh, we don't take internationals." And every company I've worked with actually said that they don't sponsor, but I managed to make my own case about why I should be accepted. So that's something that I definitely want people to know, that if somebody says, "Hey, I don't sponsor," don't turn away if that's your real goal to work there. If you want to work there, you can make it happen and there's a way to make it happen. So that's something I choose more to focus on than the soft skills, but I grew up all around the world, so I relate to a lot of people. Again, my culture is still Indian, and a lot of the students that I work with are Indian, from India, even though we don't live in the same country. But it's something that we do connect on culture wise.
Can I say this understanding the multicultural thing made you to become a career coach today?
I don't know that. I think it was more being an international student here and how difficult it was to like almost every year it would take me about 400 applications to get one internship. I think that's what really led me to. And then during the pandemic, I got two job offers during the pandemic. I actually switched jobs in the middle of COVID. I think that's what made me understand that I had something special. But once I started working with clients, I found that the international background helped me relate to a lot of different students. Yeah.
So, what are the common questions that people ask when they come to you?
So I think the most common questions is like, and this is like what my initial consultations usually look like is we try to find what the first roadblock is. So again, like thinking very like engineering wise, I'm like, okay, so we approach one issue at a time. There's a list of issues, but we got to go one at a time. So if somebody's not getting, if somebody's applying to jobs and not getting interview calls, that usually means there's something missing or not the best about their application or resume. So usually people will be like, "Hey, you know what? I'm applying for like 100 jobs a day. I'm not even getting an interview call." And I'm like, "Okay, so if you're not getting an interview call, that means they don't like what they see on paper. So let's fix the paper." So then we'll usually focus on resume stuff. Some people are like, "Hey, I keep interviewing and then I don't get the job offer." So then I'm like, "Okay, so that means let's work on your interview skills because on paper they like you, but when they're speaking to you, there's something that they're not getting out of it." And then we'll go through a mock interview training program and kind of brush up their answers or work on confidence, those kind of things. So it really depends person to person. I haven't, a lot of people have like set programs. I have, sorry, I haven't set out any programs yet just because I feel like everyone's needs are so different. So currently I've been working on an individual basis based on what their roadblock is or what they're looking for.
A person from a particular field can get a job in other field.
Yes, in fact, like that's something I've really been trying to get into. So especially like in the US, aerospace is very restricted to US citizens, and a lot of people will come to do a master's in aerospace because they're passionate about it. And obviously before enrolling, they never really thought about the fact that most of the aerospace companies only take citizens. So that's something I've been really trying to focus on, helping pivot, helping highlight the things that will apply to more industries than just your specific major. So that's something that in fact, I ended up changing my major. I was a chemical engineer and then I switched to industrial because the chemical industry was going through a downturn. And I was like, I put all my eggs in the chemical basket and I don't like that. So I switched my major, but a lot of people don't. But I want to make sure that people understand that their skills are transferable throughout industries and you can move and you can expand. I'm a big, big person on personal development outside work. So doing online certifications or Coursera classes and stuff like that, that's something I make very actionable lists with people. Like I had a girl recently who came up to me and the most advanced thing she knew was Excel. And I was like, okay, everybody in high school knows Excel. We need to get something else on your resume. I was like, you need to go learn Power BI and Tableau first. Those are the first two that I would say you start off with. And then other than that, even in Excel, you need to go experiment with pivot tables and power pivots and stuff like that so that you're like an expert in Excel. And you need to be able to call yourself either a super user or master user, stuff like that. So you actually stand out, because if somebody is graduating from high school knows Microsoft Word and Excel, and somebody is graduating with a master's and has the same knowledge, that's not standing out in the crowd, right? So I do work on a bit of that as well on a personal development side, because a lot of times that's things that people don't tell you when you're in school is what you should do with your time outside, like on your weekends or whatever. So that's stuff that I try to give unbiased advice on and be like, hey, this is actually good for you. I'm not trying to make any money, but let's go get this Coursera course. I think it'll really help you.
So, what is the response that you get when people get positive response for the tips that you gave and that works for them?
Sorry, that's my favorite part. Honestly, I love it when people come back to me after and share positive results. So far, I've done the most resume reviews, and a lot of those are resulting in at least interview calls. So, and that's the thing, because it's a stepwise process, a lot of them are getting interview calls and now they're getting rejected. So I'm like, okay, so next thing we approach, we have to work on those interview skills as well. So that's watching the results and watching people grow as human beings and changing their mindsets. Because I think that's the thing about job applications, it bears you down. Like if you're getting like 20 rejections a day, you really start to question if you can do it or not. Especially when you have a countdown timer on like going back to your home country. And I'm like, okay, I want you to not stress. You need to focus. Just calm down. We'll do this. We'll get it done. So I think that's something that, and I think it's the other thing is a lot of people, I like the only thing that I would say I wish people thought of earlier is people come to me in their final semester. And that's not the time to get a full-time job. You should have had internships prior to that, and you should start applying for your full-time at least 6 months ahead of time. And people will come up to me during the last like 3 months, and I'm like, sometimes it's a miracle, you know. And sometimes it also stresses me out. I'm like, okay, if I can't help this person, they're going back home, and they're really trusting me. So it does get stressful. But it's been positive so far. I haven't had an experience of anybody having to go back home. Most of them have received job offers or at least interview calls and are working out the offers right now.
So it seems you have enough experience about it. I think you do a lot of research in making things possible.
Yeah, actually, well, I learned a lot of it for myself. The goal was I never actually thought I would become a career coach, but having gone through so many things myself, a lot of even like I would say my college was not super supportive. Like they would be like, "Oh yeah, well, if you don't get an internship, you can just do one back home." And I'm like, okay, and they're like, well, then you can get a full time back home. And I'm like, that's not the solution because my parents live here. They work here on a visa. So I was like, okay, my back home is here though. So being international and not having a home to go back to, because a lot of people have parents back home. My parents were in America. So for me, going back to Singapore would mean starting over alone. I would actually have to get my own place. I would have to get my own job and everything because my dad left in 2008. We haven't been back to Singapore since. So it's net. So I was extra driven to make sure that this would happen for me. So all of the research that I did was initially for myself. And then I realized that it was actually something that a lot of people needed and that I should share that knowledge. But originally, it was actually just to make sure that I could stay here. It was very selfish originally.
I see a lot of Americans shifting from different fields to IT. So they are not into IT, but they are coming into IT without having any uh, experience in IT, and how it is possible.
So I think, well, working in tech has a lot, again, like every company has very different departments. So like I say this all the time, if you're a psych major, you don't have to become a psychiatrist. Like HR hires 90% of psych majors that get a job after graduation is actually in HR, and every company needs HR, whether you're in tech or whether you're not. So it's really funny. Every department, every company has at least one department. So even in a non-tech company, like for example, I work in a trucking company, we build heavy duty trucks. We do have an IT department. So if somebody there's that crossover, obviously a tech company is going to be very heavy on people with tech knowledge, but it's not to say that that's restricted. So I know a lot of people that are in tech companies that are finance analysts, and then once they're done with the finance position, they're going to go on to an IT business analyst position. Once they're an IT BA, they're doing program management, and then they'll jump to either product manager management or program management. So I think getting into tech as a field is something that people say it a lot. They're like, oh, yeah, 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 he got into tech. And I was like, yeah, but what is he doing in tech? Because if he's doing the same job that he would have done if it's a financial analyst on both sides, it doesn't really matter that you're working in tech right now. In the long term, obviously, that has great opportunities if you want to grow in that direction. Um, but yeah, I don't. I think back in the 90s, they would hire anybody for IT specific roles. I do notice it's getting a little bit harder where they're looking for specific skills and specific coding skills. But working in tech in a non-technical position, I think is very, very doable. And I think a lot of people are doing it, especially living in Seattle. I meet a lot of people who work for Microsoft and Google that are actually don't come from a tech background at all. And they come from a business background or something entirely different, and they've just kind of worked their way through it.
So what are the questions that the people who didn't have experience comes to you and ask you in order to get a job?
So I again, like because I'm not in tech, I don't specifically I don't want to speak for the tech companies because I've never gone through that process personally. But I will always tell people to focus on the skills. Like in a job description, you'll always have the skills that are needed. If it says technical skills, like like certain coding, like Java, Python, whatever, if that's something that you're lacking, but that's a core competency of the job, that may not be the right job for you. And that's something that I really, really, really talk a lot about in my coaching is there are certain jobs that we are geared out for and certain jobs we are not. Like for example, I'm a very messy person. I'm not an organized person. So for me to go into a role where let's say I'm handling 7 or 8 projects at a time, it could get pretty messy. If the job description says detail oriented, I'm like, nope, I'm not. I know I'm not. I'm a big picture person. I am not detail oriented. So I think understanding your personality and how it fits into those jobs, as well as your current set of skills. So I think something like, for example, my position as a quality systems analyst required no tech experience, but at the same time, I'm running tech projects. I just have an IT team working for me. So that's something that I was able to talk about my project management experience and how I've led projects before and how that panned out in the long term to understand how that fits into the role. So I think it's about finding a role where you fit. A lot of times people will change who they are just to get a role. And I think that sometimes it causes long-term resentment. Like if you're in a role that you were not glued out for or cut out for, your manager's going to be like, be like, hey, so and so is, they're okay. Not my top pick, and I wouldn't do that again. You're getting frustrated because you don't get to do what you want to do. And I think a lot of people forget that when it comes to getting desperate for jobs, they're like, I'll take whatever. And I think that's something that I try to always tell people. I'm like, do not take whatever because you're not going to succeed at whatever. You have to find a job that is a good fit for you, and that's the only way that you're actually going to succeed.
Can I say you're a psychologist for the people who are into companies and who are recruiting for HR
Yes.
in simple?
Well, honestly, there's a lot of psychology in it. I keep reminding people that there's certain personalities. Like for example, I work with suppliers a lot. If somebody is an introvert, you don't want to be getting 20 phone calls a day. That's not a position you want to be in, right? So like that kind of stuff, I think there's certain types of people who are not geared out for every position. And that's what I keep trying to remind people. People get very desperate and they're just like, I'll take whatever. I'm like, no, no, no. But you're not going to do well. And you're also going to be either you're going to get really tired at the end of the day because you're stepping out of your comfort zone constantly. I'm obviously you want to step out of your comfort zone a little bit to grow, but not try to become a whole new person entirely, right? So that's something that I do talk about a lot, and like organizational fit is something that I do talk about as well. Is company culture is a really big thing. You obviously in today's day and age, we're not the generation who stays with a company for 20 years. We're the generation that stays for like 3 to 5 years, and if we stay for 20 years, that's a huge compliment. So how to find a company that values the same things that you like. Like a lot of people who, example for international students, my company barely gives vacation. We have a very minimal vacation policy, but that's because we're in manufacturing. So we run almost 24 hours. So we have to be here very constantly. But my parents live a 4 hour flight away. But would I recommend the same thing to somebody whose parents live a 32-hour flight away? I probably would not. I would be like, hey, find a company that has a better PTO policy or like flexibility to work from home. Find a role that has a flexibility to work from home in case you ever need to go to India for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, because that's something that you definitely need to factor into it. Um, because that's stuff that once you accept the job, you're just going to be cribbing about it constantly. You're like, oh, I can't do this. Oh, I can't go visit my parents. And that's just going to cause long term resentment and keep you from doing your best at the job.
So the experienced people and the beginners are different. So how do you tell them? How do you tell the beginners to talk like an experience in order to make a good resume or show their skills properly and show what exactly they are to the company?
So I think I always talk like I always try to remind people that it's a lot of people forget about resumes are a two-sided thing, right? Or even jobs in general. The company's getting something out of you, but you are also getting something out of the company. So that's something that I've noticed a lot is a lot of people will answer, questions like where do you see yourself in 5 years? They'll often give it all to the company. They'll be like, "Oh, I see myself working for you guys in this role and doing that job and stuff like that." And I'm like, "No, I think it's really important to show your actual personality." So I'm like, "Okay, let's be really confident with yourself. In 5 years, if you think you're going to be getting an MBA, tell the company that." So that's something that if because the more desperate you sound, the less confident you sound, right? So then if you're like, hey, you know what? Honestly, in about 5 years, I would really like to step out and spend about 1 or 2 years to get my MBA. And then I hope to come back to, your company, hopefully, if I get this job. And a lot of times people will actually strike that as a conversation. They're like, 4 to 5 years work experience is a great timeline for an MBA. And then they'll say where they got their MBA from. And then it launches into a whole other conversation and they get to know you as a person. Oftentimes, when we keep saying what we can do for the company doesn't see a person standing on their own 2 feet. They see a slave who's ready to sign up for anything. So I think that's something that's super important is understanding who you are, what you want, and making sure that you don't just say what everybody else wants to hear. You need to say what you truly mean. And if you truly mean it, the confidence comes from within. And I think that's something that's really important. A lot of times people will just like, they'll memorize things for an interview. And that's something that I really, really advise against. And I'll always, when during my interview prep, I'll change up questions every time so that because we'll talk about taking that same work experience and answering 6 different questions with it. As long as you are familiar with what you did, you can take that and apply it to 6 different situations in a behavioral interview. So that's stuff that I always try to, especially for entry level. I'm like, don't be too desperate. Stand your ground, share your personality. Ultimately, especially in today's day and age, companies are looking to hire individuals and they're really looking for somebody that, what a lot of people say, the new age companies, they will hire somebody that they want to have drinks with after work. They don't want somebody who's going to come in 9 to 5 and leave. They want somebody that they're going to hang out with after work. They're going to talk about their families together, stuff like that. So I think that's something that's super important in today's day and age. Also showing your personality as a person. It also makes you more memorable during an interview.
So what is company and why do they need resources?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that.
What is company and why do they need resources? And where the projects come and how the project works.
I don't think I understand the question. Sorry.
I asked you three questions. What is company? And second question is
Like, what is my
what?
company? Like, where do
No,
I
no.
work?
Generally, what is company? What is company? And second question is why do they need resources? Third question is how the project works.
Okay. This is a stumper. I think I understand what you're saying. I'm going to try and answer it. A company is essentially a group of people that are trying to accomplish a common goal. That's what I always try to define a company as. Ultimately, obviously, there are Fortune 500 companies that are like millions of people, and then there are obviously smaller startups, which are like 5 people. But ultimately, everything a company does is in the betterment of their final product. And that's product or project, whatever it is, whether it's service based or product based. But ultimately, that's what I define a company as is people coming together for a common goal. Your second question was the resources, right? So I think companies have to go out and find their resources, and it becomes really tricky but sometimes when they don't know what they need, and sometimes it's really interesting if you can tell them what they need. So a lot of times, especially with newer companies or people that have not worked with a lot of diversity, I will always remind people to bring up diversity, especially in today's day and age, because if they have contracts out in India or they're working on contracts in India and they don't have anybody that can speak an Indian language that works there, hiring an Indian person would be in their benefit. So I think it's about leveraging what you already have and trying to remind the company that when they're hiring you, you can fulfill the bare minimum requirements and more, and therefore you're an asset to them. That's what I think I answered your question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, understood.
Okay. And then the third question was I totally forgot.
How the project works.
Yeah. So I think projects work on very different levels depending on how big or short term they are. But ultimately, every project's main focus is to accomplish a goal. Usually, again, for logical thinking, a goal would be time savings, automation, stuff like that. Anything that makes human life easier or better. So, either increasing quality, efficiency, something like that. So, that's normally how projects work. And it's especially in today's day and age, we bring together different people. A lot of previously we used to say, oh, we want like-minded individuals, but I think today we're celebrating differences. We want different people to come together, bring different experiences to the table, and accomplish a common goal together with their variety of expertise. That's what I think a project would be.
So, what are the levels of the companies, and what are the types of companies are there in the world?
That would be a very loaded question. Obviously, there's you're starting at like startups to like multinational companies, right? Like there's a full range of what kind of companies there are. Obviously, the main industries are at least like here. Main industries are going to be government and defense. As then we have tech, uh, general manufacturing, food and beverage, consumer products, those kind of things. Like there's at least like 10 different industries out there. Pharmaceuticals is another one, pharmaceuticals and chemicals. Yeah, I think there's a whole variety and it's really weird, but a lot of these skills transfer back and forth between them. So a lot of the, like for example, defense and government contracts is the one that aerospace normally falls into. But everything that an aerospace engineer learns is actually the same as a mechanical engineer. So if they can sell themselves as a mechanical engineer, they can easily work in automotive like me. So it's weird that they're interconnected, but they do build very different products.
So, as a career coach, I'm sure you might have connected with different country people and guided them how to get in.
Yeah, I generally choose to work with people who are already in college in the US or working in the US. I usually don't coach people who are not currently in the US because that becomes a whole other field. I usually try to help students who are already in the US stay here. Yeah.
In your state, and they can be from any field.
Yes, any field. Well, STEM. So anything science, technology, engineering, math, anything in STEM. I generally choose not to work with non-STEM majors. I have done it on occasion, but I feel like my expertise are mainly around STEM, as well as the visa requirements here for STEM are different. You actually get 3 years of work authorization on a STEM degree rather than a non-STEM degree. So those kind of reasons, I think there's a big difference between STEM and non-STEM. So I generally work with people in STEM.
So, you used a word called diversity. Can you elaborate it?
Sure. So diversity and inclusivity are like the new buzzwords for America is previously, the way the American economy and culture worked was when immigrants came here, they were really being forced and bullied, I would say, into becoming American. Forget your language, forget your food, eat our food, eat a cheeseburger. I don't know what you're eating at home. That kind of thing. So people didn't celebrate people speaking multiple languages. Other food was not celebrated. It was very different from other countries, such as like the UK, for example. There are, like Punjabis in the UK that have been speaking Punjabi for like 8 generations now, and that's something that's part of their culture, and they're not going to change. America was very different, and they wanted everybody to. The concept is called a fondue pot. So they wanted everybody to kind of melt into a fondue pot, which is like melted cheese, right? Rather than what other countries like to do is the chili or like like rajma, like that kind of stuff is like you have multiple things in one bowl, but you can taste them individually. So currently, most of the 21st century companies are working on diversity. So they're working on ways to make everyone feel included at work. And that comes in a lot of different ways, such as like, for example, like I need to take the Diwali off. Nobody's going to stand in the way of that because they know that in order to keep Indian people at our company, they need to be able to let us take Diwali and Navratri off, right? So those kind of things, diversity. I'm actually on my company's diversity council. So we're working on a lot of things to increase awareness about people from different countries, whether we're talking about immigration stuff or cultural stuff or language. So we try to do a language of the month and we'll teach everyone 5 phrases in that language. So recently we did French. We're starting with the bigger languages and working down to the smaller ones. We're actually doing Bengali next month, which I'm really excited about because I'm teaching that class. So that kind of stuff. I think a lot of companies are starting to remind people that your individualism is what keeps you special and what keeps you important. So that's something diversity and inclusivity, especially in a country like here where people of color are a minority. That's something that they're definitely trying to bring forth and make sure that everybody has a place to call home and that they feel comfortable here.
So how do a company recruit a person? Uh,
Like in general or like
and
specific?
what I mean, they'll get a lot of applications. So how do they pick up?
So again, it really depends. So most of my recruiting was done through on-campus recruitment. So they come for career fairs. I actually went to Purdue, which has the biggest career fair. One of the reasons I went to Purdue is because they have the biggest career fair in the country. So we had over 800 employers come to Purdue every year. And these recruiters would stand there and talk to students for about 9 to 10 hours a day and then interview the ones that they liked. And I think what's really important, especially when it comes to in-person recruitment, is you have to hit it off with that recruiter instantly. Because, like you said, there are a million applications, there are a million resumes in that pile. How do you make sure your resume gets to the short list for the interview? Because you only have about 5 minutes to talk to somebody. Same with how companies recruit now because of COVID. Again, they stopped all our career fairs and everything. Or for mid level and senior, usually they obviously don't go to college campuses, they will recruit online. But I think companies, really importantly, they want to look for their motto. And that's something that I think a lot of people skip. Every company has like a motto or a mission statement. And usually a lot of that is soft skills. A lot of that will say stuff like we want to accomplish. No, none of the mission statements will be like we want to be the biggest car manufacturer in America. That's not a normal mission statement. They will say we want to guarantee 100% customer satisfaction. That's our goal, right? So using that mission statement and bringing that back into your own resume and experience, I think is something that has really helped me. I have worked minimum wage jobs. I've worked in a smoothie store. I've worked as a bartender. There's a lot of things that I've done that are not engineering focused, but I have done so many things that are customer focused that that's something I brought into my current role. And I was like, hey, working with suppliers, I've worked a lot of customer facing roles and that's something that I'm very comfortable with. I used to be the weekend manager in a smoothie store, stuff like that. So I think companies want to see their ultimate goal. So sometimes it's not just about the job you're doing right now. They will want to pick up somebody that can become the future CEO if all goes well. So it's about the bigger mission statement. It's about the philanthropy that they believe in. Every company obviously has a different philanthropic cause. So some of them are going to be more nature based, some of them are going to be more education based. So for my company, it was education based, and most of my philanthropy is education based. So that's something that I think I got picked up for the interview based on that. So that kind of stuff I think is really important for companies in the long term is every person that they interview, ideally, they would want them to become an executive in 30 to 40 years, if they could.
You look so focused, you look so confident, and you look so. I think you're a very good observer.
Yeah, and you know what? I think a lot of it, I'm just a very people person, so I am very observant about people skills and what people are looking for. I also spent hours during college doing all this research and talking to recruiters. I would, even after a rejection, I would message the recruiter and ask them for advice on what I could have done better, how it was different. And a lot of them honestly just told me that they didn't think that I would fit into the company. So then I started to question that more. I'm like, what do you mean fit into the company? And what does that mean? Does that mean that I did something wrong? Or is that just, like, what can I do differently? And they were like, don't do anything differently because you can portray yourself how you want in an interview. You can't lie for 40 years. Once you start working at that company, we're going to see you as a person. And if that doesn't fit with the company, nobody's going to be happy. So that's something that I pieced together a lot over time, talking to recruiters and managers, and doing a lot of different interviews. I do interviews for fun even now. I'm not looking for a job, but I will apply for positions just to interview for practice. So that's stuff that I keep kind of like refreshing on. I read up a lot of books and stuff on like what kind of things you should say, what you shouldn't say, red flags in job applications, how to tell if a company is toxic during the interview rather than regretting it 6 months later, stuff like that.
So people come with negative thoughts. They want to get in, but they don't have that positive energy in them. They don't have that positive uh, uh, thoughts in them. So how do you motivate them? How do you make them come from their negativity?
So one of the things I really try to work with is like understanding your strengths and weaknesses. Is a lot of people tend to focus on their weaknesses. They're like, for example, a lot of people are like, hey, I've never worked in the US before. I'm like, don't start with that. You've done 3 internships in India. Let's start with that. You've worked in an international MNC before. That's a huge thing. A lot of people haven't. A lot of people have just worked in smaller startups. Like so I try to always shift their mindset to focus on the glass half full rather than half empty because everybody's glass has something in it. It just depends on how you look at it. So that's something I don't think there is ever a bad candidate. That's something that I try to always focus on. It's just about whether you're putting your best foot forward and whether you're applying to the jobs that you're a good fit for. A lot of people, for example, I know people who have done like soft degrees, non-technical degrees, and they're applying for technical jobs and getting rejected. And I'm like, okay, if you want the technical job, you need to meet the requirements. So that's something, again, like the good fit part. So that's something I do try to focus on is empowering people to understand where they will find success, as well as to focus on the positive and see the glass as half full and see what they have to offer rather than what they don't have to offer.
So tell me about the difference and the importance between logic, emotion, and rational thinking.
I think honestly, I think they work against each other. I think logical and rational thinking work very, like if you, let's say you see the job description, you meet 80% of the requirements. Your logical and rational thinking will often be like, nope, you're not going to get it. Somebody's already going to fulfill 120%. You have a bachelor's, they have a master's. That's what your logical and rational thinking will remind you that there may be 200 other people for this job that may be higher qualified than you. The emotional has the ability to go both ways. And I think that's why it's the most powerful out of all of them. You can choose to let your emotions follow the logic, or you can choose to let your emotions overpower the logic. And that's one of the things that I try to focus on is overpower the logic, but not to the point of being illogical, right? We want to make sure that we believe in ourselves and we want to make sure that we're shooting all the shots possible. That's something that I talk about a lot is you're never going to get that job if you don't apply. And there is no harm in applying. Back in like the 80s, you had to mail in resumes. That used to cost money. Right now, it doesn't cost us any money to fill a job application and submit our resume online. So what are you losing? So that's something that I think the emotional side, we definitely have to hone a lot of people to remind them that, hey, you are worth it. You need to try this. If you don't get it, then we'll think about that later. But right now, you need to shoot this shot for yourself. So that's something that I think they can work together because if your emotional side says, hey, I can do it, the logical side said, maybe there's someone better, but maybe I can just rephrase my experience to be stronger. You can go and do a quick update to your resume and rephrase it to be a stronger fit for that particular job. So they kind of go hand in hand, but they can go completely against each other and cancel it out too.
In the beginning, you mentioned that spirituality. So tell me about spirituality and yoga and other physical and mental activities which will influence in getting into a company and useful in and importance of it in making a recruiter know that I'm this kind of a person.
So I'm not a big spiritual person. A lot of the other coaches that I've seen are. I think like for me, it's a lot more about science. Like I believe in sleep, like really heavily. Like I always account for 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night, cut off. So I know, and sometimes I will push it to 9.5 if I'm still tired. So that's something that I like really strongly believe in, like nutrition, um, sleep, and making sure that you're relaxed, doing things that you love outside of work. So that's one of the things why I originally became a lifestyle influencer was because I was a photographer and I was already taking a lot of photos and I was like, what if I stood in front of the camera, you know? And that's how I originally became an influencer was to channel my creative side. And that's a creative side that I don't get to work on as an engineer at all. So I think making sure that all sides of yourself are fulfilled is really important. That being said, there are a lot of things that people can do with their creative side as well. Like I know a lot of people are really big into dance and yoga, stuff like that. So as long as you feel satisfied at the end of the day and you get a good night's sleep and you feel accomplished. I always try to do like a what did I do today? What did I get accomplished today? Right before I go to sleep, I do like a mental checklist to remind myself of all the good that I accomplished today so that I feel satisfied before I go to sleep. And that's something that I think is super, super, super important because if there's things in the back of your mind all the time, you're never fully relaxing. And if you're never fully relaxing, your body's always going to be in a state of stress. And I think that's something that I really strongly I believe more in the science side. I'm like, okay, but I'm a little less spiritual that way, but I do agree that everyone needs to get stresses out of their lives however they need. For me, that's more like photography and I do a lot of DIY stuff around the house, stuff like that. So for me, it's more about channeling the creative side that I don't get to do at work. So it's still a lot of doing rather than like relaxing, but or meditating or yoga or anything like that. So that's something that I think is really important is making sure that at the end of the day, there is no part of you that feels unsatisfied and to really, really focus on sleep. That's something I would tell my younger self like 20 times over.
So at last, tell me about the service that you provide and tell me, are you only fixed with one country, which is US, or to you can give service to any country, any person who is from any country?
So I currently focus on the US for the main reason that I don't want to speak for other countries. There are other countries that focus on like two-page resumes and this and that. And it's every, even though there are a lot of companies in common between different countries, the culture in every country is so different. And having lived in all of these four countries and like four of like the bigger countries before, I know how different the culture is. So having not worked there because I grew up there as a kid, I have seen it but I'm not exactly sure yet. So I haven't expanded to other countries yet, but I hope to someday. Currently, I'm only working with people in the US. I most of my packages are bespoke. So based on what the person needs, if they're really struggling with everything, A to Z, we'll start off with resume, then we'll go to interview, then we'll go to relocation and other things like that, or we continue working on through their first 2 years to work on getting raises and negotiating salaries, stuff like that. So, kind of like end to end, people will take a break and come back after a year or so when they're like, hey, you know what? This position is not what I thought. I'm back on the job hunt. Can we go over this again? And I'm like, yep, let's do it again. So, that's kind of my A to Z starting and ending. Starting all the way at like the initial resumes and stuff. I would prefer to work with people who are younger. The younger, the better, because I think resume, a lot of it goes behind building your resume. A lot of times people come to me and they've had no work experience, and I'm like, okay, so what are we putting on your resume? Because having content for your resume is really important. So that's something that I always try to focus on is if they come to me earlier when they're in first year or second year, I would be glad to hook them up with internships and try to get them internships so that they have stuff for when they graduate. So that's something I do try to remind people that it is a long-term goal. Getting a full-time job is not like you wake up one day and you're like, I want to work now. So it takes a lot of building towards it. I did three Fortune 500 internships, and at the end of it, I got one job offer because of COVID. And that was not something that anybody anticipated, that people were going to struggle so much. But I had over 20 to 30 friends who went back to their countries because there was so much unemployment with people who had years of experience that they were willing to take entry level roles. Therefore, college students had nothing to take. So that kind of stuff happens unpredictably all the time, and in order to put our best foot forward, it needs to be a long-term effort, not just a short-term one.
So I have a couple of questions. I already exceeded the time that you gave,
Yeah, no
but
worries. We can do a couple questions. Yeah.
so the question is, what do you think that is working for the top companies in the world in order to be in the top in the list?
Like, what is important to work there?
Yeah, what is working for them, for the companies? What they are
Like, what
doing
is it like?
inside the company?
Like, what is it like working there?
Yeah. No, no. What is working? What is the? I mean, it can be quality or it can be anything that is that they are making things possible and make to in order to put the company in the top in the list.
Okay, so how do you become like a successful company?
Yeah.
Okay. I think there are two things that I always point out. There are two ways that a company is deemed successful. One, in terms of their product, right? Like how they rank in Fortune 500, for example, how their stocks are doing, stuff like that. It's all about the product that they're product and or service that they're selling, and how they're marketing that. There's a lot of like hardcore business behind it, but I've noticed within the last 10 years or so, there's a big shift between the product they're building and the company they're building. And I think right now, a lot of people would deem successful companies as companies where the employees want to stay. Place where people enjoy going to work, and the places with the best benefits, PTO, free food in the cafeteria, like Google does. Everybody who works at Google, I barely know anybody that's upset for working at Google. Google obviously is a great product as well. They have both, but there are some companies that would have one more than the other. So for example, like I can't think of I like a lot of the startups have really good cultures. One of the startups my brother worked at, they had in fact like they had free breakfast every day. So they expected their employees to show up at about 7, but there was no place nearby that was open at 7 for food. So they started free breakfast in their own office. And that really shows that they care about their employees, and the employees were glad to come in at 7, even though people usually do 9 to 5. They were doing 7 to 3 and they were okay with that. Right? So that's something I think there are two ways to deem a company's success. One is obviously there's a lot of branding, marketing, and product on the Fortune 500 and how much money you make side. But on the other side, it's also about how you treat your employees and how you keep them happy. I think that's another big factor in what people call a successful company nowadays.
So another question is, tell me about writing, speaking, listening,
What about it?
how this works in as a person who wants to enter into a company and who wants to work better in a company. Tell me about how to use these skills: listening, writing, speaking.
So I think all three of those are obviously really important. I would say out of all of them, writing is probably the least important because most companies have some professional writers. And that's the really funny part is every company usually has a department called technical writing. All of their warranty manuals or anything officially written by the company, whether it's a press release or whatever, will be written by the technical writers and or HR. So usually, if the writing is not perfect, it can be redone. But the thing about listening and speaking is that they're done live. You're doing that in front of people, and that moment is gone in a second. And I think it's really important to learn how to read the room, both for listening and speaking. And I think that's something being observant and reading the room is so important because you need to know when to listen as well as when to speak. I think for most of the women in STEM, learning when to speak is a very difficult thing, especially for a lot of us that grew up in Asian households. We have been taught to stay quiet. We have been told, okay, this is an adult's table. We don't want to hear the kids talking, stuff like that. Or like we're often told that we don't have an opinion. So a lot of times understanding and reminding yourself when it's appropriate to speak and when you need to speak your mind is something that I struggled with personally. I will even admit this to people. And I struggle with empowering other people as well because it's years of coaching that has gotten us quiet. And listening, I would say, is something that it really depends on your speed of thinking. So, for example, I think very quickly. So sometimes I don't, and I do this all the time, I don't listen because I'm already thinking about the next thing. And I'll interrupt people accidentally, be like, hey, so what about that thing? And they're just like, hold on, change the slide. And they're like, there it is. Just calm down for 10 seconds. So that's something that I think is really important. But because it's done live, it's something that we really need to focus on. And it's something that you really need to work on actively because it can become a deterrent from people working with you. And that's the unfortunate part. You may be someone that's very technically sound. You may never become a manager if you're not good at listening and speaking. And then same with the writing side. Even if you're not 100% good at the writing side, that's something that you can rewrite 4 or 5 times. You will often not get a chance to say the same thing 4 or 5 times. Or if someone doesn't understand you the first time, or you're speaking too fast, or you're going above people's heads, speaking the right jargon depending on your audience, those kind of things. I think the speaking and listening is so live and it's so important that that could actually stop you from progressing in the work field.
The points that I observed in you is you compete with the time. I mean, you fight. I mean, your competition is only time. I think, and also you are very fast in making decisions, and you're very fast, like you said, you are very fast in uh, thinking the next one.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
for
took
sure.
I took more than 450 interviews who are from different fields and who are from different parts of the world. I think you are a completely different person. This is completely a different experience for me. You are very fast. I think everybody should be like you in the world.
It has its drawbacks. So for example, when your brain runs really fast, it's really hard to slow down. So like if somebody doesn't understand what I'm trying to say and I've already said it 2 or 3 times, there's a person in my office that I really struggle to work with because every time I say something to him, he has to have me repeat it 5 or 6 times for him to understand. And so I went to my manager and I was like, okay, personal development conversation. How do I make him understand something? I don't have the patience. I don't have, like you said, my competitor is time. I don't have the time to say something 5 or 6 times. So how do I say it in a way that he understands it? And so my manager told me, he's like, oftentimes when people work on different speeds, that's where the writing is actually very useful. So what I started to do is I would email him so that he can read it at his own speed. Because that's something about writing, because it's not done live, you can reread things as many times as you need. So, especially working with him, I've often had to email like big paragraphs, and I'm like, okay, when you're done reading this, come to me and ask me your questions. So, he will take 20 minutes to read it, but I'm not wasting 20 minutes explaining it to him. So that's something that I've learned is different ways of communication for different people. Oftentimes, like if I'm speaking at a certain level or speed and somebody's not understanding, I'll just be like, you know what, let me summarize it and I'll email it to you later. And then you can work on it in your own spare time. So I'll often say that. And it's hard to not sound rude and be like, you're not understanding me. So that's something that I'll be like, you know what, I have to run to a meeting. Let me send you an email about that and we can talk about it later, stuff like that. So I think that's something that I'm definitely learning because I do work on a faster pace than most people, but it is a challenge too. It's definitely something that that I work on constantly from a personal development point of view.
The people who are watching and listening to you right now who are into AI, I mean artificial intelligence, I think they have to work on you in order to create the artificial intelligence machines, because only if they understand the human intelligence, you are perfect example for human being. Like, it's as a tech person, I need to understand the human psychology in order to create the technical machine devices. So I
Right.
think you are the perfect person. I think if they talk with you, if they communicate, and if they understand, it seems like you have huge percentage of experience, and also the quick decision making skills.
Thank you. It can lead to problems. Sometimes I make decisions too quickly without knowing all the information, so it's not a good thing all the time.
Yeah, but I love listening to a person. I'm very fast in understanding. Like you're very fast in taking, and you're very fast in moving forward, understanding that I'm very fast in understanding people.
I'm good. I'm glad because we have a struggle with that in my office, is people understanding me. So I'm glad that we're on the same page.
So at last, the companies and the employees are who are going to be an employee. Do you have anything to say to those people, and do you want to offer your service to them? I will put your
Absolutely.
links in the description of this video. People who finds our video on YouTube can find your links.
Perfect. Yeah. So currently I'm rebranding my website, which is why my website is not on there. But currently I'm taking everything through Instagram and email. So my email is thedesicareerwoman@gmail.com. Kept it super simple. But yeah, I'm definitely taking on new clients. I don't anticipate not taking on new clients soon. So I want to help as many people as I can, whether it's a short-term thing like just fix your resume and call it a day, or whether we want to work together long-term. I'd be glad to do either, and I would love to even chat with people. I do a lot of initial consultations that actually don't pan out, but the initial consultations are free, full of free advice. So people can come chat with me, take the free advice, have a great conversation, and go home too.
So, as a great communicator, what do you say about my video series? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
I have. Well, I haven't seen it on YouTube. I've seen it on IGTV, but I think it's a great thing that you're doing, and you've gotten such a variety of people, and that's super exciting to see. And I'm so excited to see your like full potential in your future. I'm so excited for you.
So, in future, I'll take an interview of yours again, talking about something which is very important, and to tell to my audience about the service that you provide. At the same time, the tips that you give, it may be helpful for them.
For sure, we can do, yeah, we can do like a focus session on like, like just resumes or like just interviews or like
Yeah.
you can interview me for like a mock interview or something like that and like we can record my answers and whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah, specific questions that because I don't have enough industry experience, I'm not into a company, but still I'm very good in understanding human psychology and understanding the technology. I'm very good in understanding it. So, but I'll try to match with your level, but I think I did now.
Yeah, I think you did great. I think this is one of the best interviews or like back and forth I've ever had. So,
Awesome. So, can I put this video and audio clip on my YouTube channel with your
of
permission?
course. Yeah, yeah. I look
And
forward to
also, in my on my podcast website, social media, everywhere with your permission.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Just go ahead and tag me in it.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Adya, for giving me your valuable time and spending your valuable information and your valuable knowledge and valuable skills and valuable tips here with my audience.
Thank you. Thank you.
So have a good sleep.
You too. Well, have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.